Hello and welcome back to Building on a Budget Models. I'm Thomas, and today we're going to be building the new Revell Porsche 911 Carrera 3.2 Coupé. Now firstly you start with the engine. Most of these need to be done in aluminium and semi-gloss black, which is what I've done with these parts here. The larger parts I used some spray cans, and then smaller parts were then brushed. Used some extra thin Tamiya cement to glue the large parts of the boxer engine together. There are two Porsche decals that go on the top of this air inlet manifold, but unfortunately they're done in silver, which means that they kind of disappear once applied. This was done in aluminium and then I painted in black around the edge. Cocktail stick was very useful here. Now the decals are really well printed. For the most part, add a lot of detail to the engine. A bit of microsol helped them set. Use some Tamiya gold for these wheels. Now then the gearbox is just two parts like this. That's done in aluminium. This is a bit of a test because in actual fact I'll want to add that later once it's gone into the kind of engine housing part. Here you are, the engine housing is done in the body colour. In this case it's Tamiya TS100 semi-gloss gunmetal. Once that's pushed into place, then attach the gearbox from the underside. Now the undercarriage was also done in the same TS100. There's then some suspension parts that need to be done in semi-gloss black, and then you fit the engine with its housing into place. I had no issues with any of these, but you do need to make sure that they are glued in nicely. The fitment was all really nice, but just in case I did some dry fitting first before adding glue. Now I chose to drill out the end of the exhaust because it was filled up, but apart from that this is pretty nicely moulded. There's two little orange decals as well. Now the wheel hubs, now the brake system here are kind of strange construction. You've got this part here and then this sort of, I don't know, it's like a substitute for a polycap, shouldn't be glued in place, just kind of put that in the middle, and then the disc brakes go on top. I used super glue to fit the disc brakes but was very careful not to glue the centre of them. This bar should allow both of the front wheels to turn. And then this part here locks those into place, and then the details that you painted are then covered up with this plate. Once the engine is in place in the undercarriage, there are then some smaller parts to add. The distributor cap I think was one of the hardest parts to fit. It just didn't really want to go in. I had to narrow the kind of pin to fit it into place, If you were to wire this, I think it would be quite difficult, so you might want to get an aftermarket distributor cap with holes pre-drilled. But there it is. Then there's a few more parts to go on top. There's decals for a lot of these, which really add to the detail. It's nice that this comes with a full engine. I know that the Tamiya 911 Turbo doesn't come with an engine. The bodywork has some mould lines along the front here, and unfortunately there are some sink marks in the plastic around the rear window. So I used some Mr. Hobby Mr. White Putty R on the end of a cocktail stick like this. It dries fairly quickly, so that allowed me to then sand it down flat a few hours later. Here you can see where I filled holes with putty. I then used my UMP sanding sticks to get rid of those mould lines. As I say, there weren't many. Most of them were kind of inbuilt with some of the panel lines of the car. And then I gave it 2 coats of white Tamiya primer, and then 3 coats of TS100 semi-gloss gunmetal. The boot engine cover fits into place nicely at the back. I decided to put this into place now before adding the gloss clear. Now then, there are 3 main decals to go on the body. There's this Carrera one, which goes on the engine cover at the back. There's no raised detail for that, however there is for the Porsche shield at the front. I used Microsol to help these adhere as best as possible. Then I gave it 4 coats of TS13 gloss clear. I left that to cure for about a week and then came back to it and wet sanded it. This is with 3000 grit sandpaper and warm water. Put it over the tea towel here to kind of absorb any excess water. I'd sand this kind of in a straight line, sort of back and forth pattern. Try to avoid raised details as much as possible, so as to not burn through to the paint. Then went up to 5000 grit, and then I moved on to polish. This is Kent Models Hyper Polish, and it's the cloth from UMP. I kind of work on one panel at a time, kind of spread out a sort of pea-size amount of polish, and then use a very quick sort of back and forth motion. Use minimal pressure for this, just like when wet sanding, as I don't want to burn through. I know this isn't a perfect finish, but I'm pretty happy with it. There's a nice shine over all parts of the car. Now when it came to the dashboard, there were left or right hand options, both really nicely moulded. I decided to use some semi-gloss Hull Red from Vallejo. This is their model colour range, which are good to brush paint. Also used some Revell semi-gloss black. The floor here was also painted in semi-gloss Hull Red, and then I drilled in the side for the left-hand drive pedals. This was also sprayed in matte clear to make it look more like carpet. Now this part of the rear seats needs to be done in iron because you can see it in the engine compartment. And there's also some little switches here, not quite sure what they are, maybe they're window switches, probably not actually. The decals are very nicely printed. I used some UMP strong decal solution to help them really sort of settle into the instrument housing. As well as the instrument decals, there's also a radio and heater decal. There's also a different decal for cars which use miles per hour, though I'm not sure that you can really see much difference. Now the rear seats have also got this folding part, which is a really nice feature. Pedals fit in quite snugly, but make sure that you drill the holes to the right sort of width. Now fitting this folding seat in is a little bit of a tight fit. I actually scratched off some of the paint fitting this in, which meant I had to redo it. Once it gets in place though, it folds down really easily. Obviously if you want it secured into one particular position, you can just glue that. There's two little slots for this to fit in at the back of the floor. Now this centre console here, I would recommend fitting the handbrake first, as I found that that went in quite difficultly with this in place already. Little decal there. Now here I put the gear stick in first, however I later have to remove the centre console as I found it very difficult to put the handbrake in here. There's also the seatbelt sockets for the front two seats, which is a really nice feature. I used a little bit of red paint pen to add the buttons to the top of these. I'm pretty happy with that. Now then, the seats do have different numbers, but they seem pretty much identical to me. Give them a quick test fit before you glue them in place. There's a few switches and I think the keyhole that need to be highlighted here. The indicator stalks here have very small decals on them, however I chose to leave them off, and the wheel I did entirely in hull red. Pretty happy with how that looks so far. There's also these two Porsche decals that go on the carpet, and then there are some really nice decals for some of the speakers in the car. These go over moulded details. Again, micro sole on these speakers and a little bit of light pressure from a cotton bud helps them to adhere nicely. I decided to add this 2mm black ribbon just behind the door openings as a kind of simulation seatbelt. I couldn't find anywhere to put it in nicely on the back seats, unfortunately. I used a bit of super glue gel to fit the door cards in as well as possible. The same with the dashboard here. This needs to be really secure as the interior slots into the bodywork rather than onto the floor. I used some curved masking tape and also some Tamiya normal masking tape here to do this rubber front lip, which was painted in Revell semi-gloss black. Make sure to push the tape in really firmly with maybe a toothpick or a cotton bud so that you don't get any bleed over the edge. I was pretty pleased with how this turned out. Obviously you want to do this after clear coating the car to give it that semi-gloss finish. Same goes for these rubber sections here. And this here will go behind the light bar. Even though the gunmetal is kind of reflective, I preferred to use some silver. It doesn't matter if it goes over the bottom a bit because there'll be a bumper over that. These side ones are done in matte black. And then you've got these washer jets that go in front of the windscreen, which are also done in matte black. Now, I found some of the clear parts had a little bit of flash, such as these headlight lenses, which didn't exactly fit into the housings. The housings were done in body colour and then with some clear coat. I then did the insides of them in silver and then glued on the lenses using some contactor clear from Revell. These indicators here are half done in semi-gloss black and half done in orange Sharpie. They fit in really nicely. Then you've got some decals here that go in the inside of the boot, including this sort of rubber trim for the boot to close on. It's not a boot, is it? It's an engine cover. What do you call the engine? Is it in the engine cover? Engine compartment of a 911? Let me know in the comments. Then what's a really nice feature is this decal here for the rubber trim in front of the headlights. On the 911 Turbo, this was really difficult to mask and paint neatly. So the fact that they've given you a decal for it this time means that you can do it really easily. Now there's two varieties of bumper. There's this one with a lower lip, which needs to be done in matte black, or there's this one which doesn't have a lower lip. It's up to you which one you use. I preferred the one with the lip. The fog lights are made up of two parts. You've got the black housing, which was then done with a bit of silver on the inside, and then you put the lens in the middle. I used some contactor clear to fit this, and it's really nice that these are separate because it makes it just that little bit easier to paint. You've then got one for each side. And you can see the two holes in the middle for the number plate. You can choose either a wide number plate in the European style or a narrow one in a more North American Japanese style. Now these holes need to be drilled for the side indicators. I believe that's because in some parts of the world they aren't needed. I really should have done this before painting. However, they fit pretty nicely. Now I fitted the front bumper here, but really I shouldn't have done that until the body all went together. Now the rear light bar here, I used red and orange Sharpie to colour it in. I also used a little bit of black Sharpie for the edges and some semi-gloss black paint for some of the colour that went over the red. There's a Porsche decal that goes in the middle. However, I chose to make sure that it was all glued in place before adding that later. Now then you've got two forms of overriders. The standard ones used in Europe or the extra large ones used in North America. As I said before, I'm going for the European spec. There's little white lights that go in the middle of those. And then you add the number plate to the middle. That fits very nicely onto the back. The rear bumper you can add before putting the bodywork onto the chassis. Now the wheels were first done in semi-gloss black, and then I used some Revell silver acrylic around the outsides, trying my best not to get it on any of the 5-spoke wheels. You've got two different tyres here. The rear ones are slightly wider, and they also have R and F stamped into the crosspiece that they come with. They fit really snugly here. Here you can see the F to show that these are the front tyres. Be careful with the front ones, as the steering mechanism means that they are just that little bit more vulnerable to snapping. It does roll though. And the front wheels turn. Now for the windscreens, I used some Revell semi-gloss black on a broad brush and just brushed it on freehand. Revell acrylic is really good for this kind of job because mistakes can be easily scratched off using a cocktail stick or similar. Annoyingly, the rear view mirror glues directly onto the glass. I used a little bit of Bob Smith Super Gold for this, very small amount, and then didn't touch it for a long time. I also added the tax disc decal on the inside, on the passenger side, and then used some more contact clear to secure it, trying not to get fingerprints on the inside. Pretty happy with that. The side windows were a little bit of a tight fit, so I sanded them down a little bit and used the same freehand method with semi-gloss black to paint the rubber trim, and then did the same for the rear window. There's a small Porsche decal that goes on the inside of that. Now, rather than using the decals for the wing mirrors, I used some aluminium foil over the bits in the middle of them. The mirrors themselves are painted in body colour, and then you do a little bit of black rubber trim around the outside. I'm pretty happy with that. And I used a little bit of super glue gel here, and they fit really nicely. I also noticed that they're asymmetrical. Does anyone know why? Now, the windscreen wipers here didn't fit very well, which meant that I had to sand them down a little bit to fit in better. You may want to dry fit them before putting them into place. However, the door handles fit really nicely. I added a little dab of silver for the door locks. And there we have it. I'm pretty pleased with how this turned out. Revell have made a really nice kit here. Obviously there are some issues with the sink marks, but I'm pretty pleased with it. Let me know in the comments if you're going to be getting this one, whether this Coupé version or the Targa top. I think it's a really big improvement on the turbo, which they brought out previously. Here you can see the two cars next to each other. Let me know in the comments down below which is your favourite generation of the 911. Thanks a lot for watching. Please do comment, like, share and subscribe. Hit the bell icon to stay notified, and I'll see you soon.